Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and today I'm here with Daniel. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, how's it going?
It is going so well, and I am so thrilled that you are here after we just got to see each other not too long ago in the real world, getting to carry on conversations even now. It's a great thing.
Yeah, nothing quite like a manual visit.
We do what we can with the time we have, certainly. So I think we were chatting a little bit before. Our first interaction in person was based around the musical Oklahoma somehow.
Yes, so I have long loved musicals my entire life. And, obviously, as a rite of passage, you have to know Oklahoma as a musical if you're going to even pretend to be in any way interested in the genre at all. I do know that it was the very first storybook musical. Everything before it were more like Ziegfeld Follies and reviews, where
Mm-hmm.
it's just like stringing along songs to like have Ethel Merman or whoever your star power was get some time in the sun. And this was the actual first time that on stage the story was more important than the music or the character or the actor. And I think that was a really fascinating turn for musical theater.
So as you were saying, kind of cutting this cloth, you recognize Oklahoma.
Yes, very much.
So that was our first connection in person was I forget who actually started singing it, and then several
It
of us.
had to have been Parker. I would not have been brave enough to do that.
Yeah, it must have been Parker, our good friend Parker, and somehow that drew us together. And unbeknownst to me, I had already enjoyed some of your cube design, particularly the Reading Rainbow.
Yeah, that is my brainchild, my love, my gift to the magical world.
I'd love to dive into a couple specific things about that cube. How about you give us the overview for Reading Rainbow as we get started?
Sure. So, Reading Rainbow is your typical 360 card cube. The whole idea behind it is gold cards, multicolor cards, not hybrid and not adding monocolor cards or fuse cards or anything like that. It's all gold border, and that includes the lands also. The big difference for that and other cubes that you come across on a regular basis is that it starts the game with a Pillar of the Parents on the battlefield. It comes to the battlefield untapped, and you can tap it to get any color. The caveat to that is that it can only be used to spend on gold spells, multicolored cards, not activated abilities or anything like that. So that's ultimately the shtick of Reading Rainbow. And I constructed this probably in 2018, 2019, a couple of years at this point.
That setup leads to so many interesting decision trees that I want to unpack. But before I get us to that point, I want to back up a little bit and ask, how did you find your way into Cube?
Oh, okay. So I have to admit something to you. I have not enjoyed drafting. I didn't enjoy drafting for years. I started the game when like Ravnica came out. That was like the first set that I'd actually fallen in love with. And so like the idea of two colors working together to do something more powerful than either one can do on their own was a really cool concept for me. But I really didn't like drafting as an idea. Like at least when I was first starting out, I didn't like booster drafting or anything like that because it's just like you have all these cards that they might fit, they might not fit, and you have to sort of figure it out as you're going around and picking cards out of the pack. And my brain does not work in a way where I'm seeing what other people are taking or I have an idea what other colors people are in. I also don't have a really good sense for what's a threat card versus what's a support card versus what is the removal spell that I need to pick at this mana cost. That those kinds of things just don't fit in my brain. And so for me, drafting was just I was always the O3 at the table. And I did it because my friends liked it and I didn't understand it. I was much more of a commander player and still am to a large extent. I have like 35, 36 commander decks, and for me it's like the joy of a commander game is like you get to be social with your friends. You also get to present a thing that you've designed yourself, and you have the restriction of a singleton format. You're restricted by the commander that you choose and the kinds of cards that you want to have in that deck. And I just really thought that building a commander deck was much more interesting than drafting.
It's like an expression of identity and like things you enjoy, right?
Exactly. And that's why I liked Commander in the first place, is because it gave me a sort of sense of identity. It gave me a way to showcase, like, oh, if I'm building an Azorius deck, this is how I would want the Azorius to be. And then, like, I'm really close friends with really intense cubers in the Baltimore area, and they were just like, "Come on, try a cube." And I was like, "What's a cube?" Uh, and so they introduced it to me, and at first I was a little suspicious. I was like, I don't know, guys. This doesn't quite seem what I would want to do."
It has this drafting thing in it.
It has this drafting thing in it, but I think that, like, what the unlock for me was, this is a cube that someone else designed, right? That this is, I hate the word curated, but, like, it is built with these things in mind for others to play with. And I got to see a lot of analogy between constructing a commander deck and designing a cube. And so that, I think, was the unlock for me. That was like, oh, maybe this is something that's a little bit more understandable than I'd initially given it credit.
So it's just like a really big commander deck that other people have to play with. Or I mean, get to play with.
Yes. Yeah. And so they were starting out with building their cubes. We have the Bun Magic cube, we had the regular cube, and a couple of others early on, like there was a mono black cube in our play group. And they thought, like, Danny, you should build something. I was like, I don't know, guys. This doesn't seem like anybody would be interested in anything that I'd want to do. And I was like, if I do anything, I think that the creative lens for me would be going back to my very first set, which was Ravnica. Ravnica really built up the notion of multicolored gold spells being on par with all the other spells that had been out in Magic at the time.
Like actually playable and not just relics from Invasion Block.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. Not a 6 drop vanilla 5/5. So, like,
All this hate for Axelrod Gunnarsson. Come
I
on.
you know listen, Axelrod, he had his time in the sun, which was 20 years ago plus, and haven't seen the light of day since.
I don't even know if he saw light of day then, but
I don't think so. But I went on to, I think it was Cube Tutor at the time. This is a long time ago. I was looking for inspiration on, like, what other people have done to make Cube in a sort of multicolor fashion, because there were ones that, like, focused on multicolor spells. And I looked, and it was like more than 100 of these cards are artifacts to support the colors that you want to be in. And I was like, well, that's not gold at all. That's not multicolor. That's just like mana fixing. And I was like, so what would I do if I could create a way to make mana fixing work sort of wholesale at the start of the game, so that wasn't really a concern that you had to play? I didn't want it to be such that, like, you didn't have any idea if you had to draft lands or not. I didn't want it to be everybody gets all the colors at all times, because I feel like that keeps you from being able to make decisions as you're drafting. But I decided that, like, let's put a gold card out at the very beginning that helps you along the way, and you don't spend your first turn just playing a tapped land and passing. And so that's sort of where the idea was, to remove all of the signets and talismans and things like that that other cubes that I saw doing this kind of thing, they were sort of focusing on that as part of the get to the good stuff. And I was just like, just get to the good stuff.
you just to start right there.
Yeah, and I also noticed, of course, as it works, like, gold spells don't have one mana spells, right? That's just out of their nature. So, what if I just skipped that first turn entirely and gave everybody a card to start with? And that's where the Pill of the Parents came in.
And I think I want to clarify there too. You don't have anything hybrid here either. They are all
No,
everything in the cube is gold.
everything is gold. Every land is gold. Even if it taps for 2 mana, it has a gold border, really to help make everything look as the same as possible when you're looking at it.
Was there anything specific that led to Pillar of the Parents particularly, or was it like you're strolling down the street and suddenly the lightning bolt strikes and you're like, oh yeah, this is the fix?
It's a Ravnica card. It was the first thought that I had for how do you allow for mana fixing. I think I looked initially at Forbidden Orchard, which also does the same thing, but has the downside of giving somebody else a 1/1 spirit.
That would get pretty gummy.
It would get pretty gummy. It would add a lot more play patterns that were sort of outside of what I wanted to accomplish. And so far, that has been the neatest and cleanest of the land options. Recently, they've come out with Plaza of Heroes. They also had Mana Confluence released in, I guess it was Theros, but that also was if I put eight of them out on the field for one for each player, then that just is draining your life total in a way that didn't seem entertaining or fun. It's nice to have one in there for you to draft if you really want it. So if you want to do like an explosive five color thing, you aren't restricted from that. But I didn't want that to be the way that you got to the fun thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is five color a particularly viable thing, or do you find that more focused decks do better?
Heck yeah. So like here's the thing. In just like in every game, you have your aggro, you have your mid range, you have your control deck, and then you have your like five color good stuff. And five color good stuff is really well supported in this cube. So you can do something like Urza, you can do Kami War, you can do Invasion of Alara, you can have Jared Carthalion out there, but you're not as punished if you restrict yourself to two or three colors.
You mentioned with everything being gold, this is a visually stunning cube to look at a pack one, pick one of, especially if you come from a more traditional drafting environment.
The first iteration of this was called All That Glitters. And then I just changed it to Reading Rainbow because every time I watched my friends draft this, I would say the first 10 minutes of it is everybody looking through every single card and being like, I haven't seen this card before. This is draft from like 7 years ago. Why would I have looked at this? There is a lot of reading involved. It doesn't have many cards I think that are unfun, but there is definitely a lot of reading that you have to commit to if you're going to do this draft.
Well, that's one of my secret goals often is if I can get people to read new cards, it makes me happy. So this
Mhm.
speaks to me on a particular level.
Yeah, I really like it. And in the opposite way of if you're in a color or two early on in a normal cube, you can sort of ignore the other colors that are coming your way. But if you're in Reading Rainbow, you could viably make anything work with anything if you're really like committed to it. You could have a three color tokens matter deck splashing a fourth or fifth color without too much pain in that process.
So as I look across the cube here, yeah, and I see this being more and more of a theme these days, folks aren't particularly beholden to spreadsheet aesthetics always. Do you think there's a value in trying to balance colors in a cube like this?
When I first started, in the same way that in Ravnica all 10 guilds are equally represented, even though Jameer is, the weird one off,
I didn't think that one existed.
it doesn't exist until it does.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and now they're here. I wanted very strongly for there to be specifics for each guild to do, right? I wanted there to be a specific number of spells in those colors. Every color pairing got 25 spells. Every three color pairing had, I guess it was like five or six or something like that. And I was really, really meticulous in that. And as I've been playing it more and more, that shifts. I take a couple of things out of one color, I add a couple more into another. I try to have fewer two drops in some colors than in others, just because you want to be able to support sort of the feeling of specific colors being aggro versus control. So I've really tried to make it more like that. But initially, I tried to keep it as specific to exactly 25 as possible. And then I let that go. And I think that the cube is actually better for that. There are really great creative decisions you can make out of restriction, but sometimes the restrictions that are set up are not really helping you get to the final goal.
That's a great thought. And I imagine players or drafters probably aren't going to notice. Like nobody's going to be going, "Hey, where's my seventh Grixis card or whatever?"
Yeah, that's not where people are going. What people typically look for are cards that work together. You're thinking of a blink spell that can target Siege Rhino, something like that, or if you're in the tokens deck and you get past an incandescent aria, no matter what colors you're in, you're probably going to try to grab that card. If you're in something that's doing like big dumb creatures like a Naya or Esper artifacts, you're probably also going to want to find something that's going to give you haste. And there are a couple of creatures and enchantments in there that do that that aren't necessarily in those colors. So it's really like you as the drafter get to decide not only what colors am I going to be in, but like what's the kind of thing that I want to do today. And I find that that's a much more compelling way to draft than being like, well, I'm in blue, so I have to draft this like 3 drop 2/2 flyer.
Well, and you definitely give drafters the tools to do that too. Looking at the land base in particular, how have you liked the thriving lands as tools for that?
The Thriving Lands are the only cards that I have sort of allowed to have multiples of. There's 4 of each of them, primarily because they do what I would want a guild gate to do ultimately, which is give you the offering of 2 different colors, but it still keeps with the all gold aesthetic. So when they were initially printed, I was really, really psyched about them. Nowadays, as more options become available, I have been looking more into removing at least one set of them to add more space for lands. But I am really happy that they exist so that I can have them because otherwise, there are not many gold lands that you can add in here. I feel like I've added most in, and some of the worst ones I've taken out, but it's just been really difficult. The other thing that I have really pulled back from as far as the lands are concerned are like the Transguild Promenade type cards
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
you have to pay 1 mana to keep it from being sacrificed. But because the pillar can't offer that, it's just a feel bad if somebody plays that land and then has to sacrifice it. So I think I only have one of those kinds of things in the cube entirely.
Yeah, and I appreciate you've noted that the Pillar of the Parents doesn't play with activated abilities particularly well.
Yeah.
But there are not a whole lot of activated abilities through the cube.
No, that's been intentional, right? You like if you have access to something at the beginning of the game and throughout, and I as a designer have been so meticulous in keeping cards that don't play like you want them to out. I've also removed a lot of the activated abilities or triggered abilities that Pillar can't support. Because I feel like it's kind of bad and not exciting in a design or drafting capacity to be like, hey, there's this really cool card, but just kidding, you have to work harder for it. So, like, there were things that were in there early on, like the legendary enchantment set from Ixalan that flipped into legendary lands.
Yeah, yeah.
The legendary lands are super cool, but the only one of them that has remained has been Path of Metal.
Yep, red, white. Hmm.
Yeah, the red white one. And maybe the black green as well, I don't remember. But the other 3, the Orzhov one had a activated ability that you couldn't use with Pillar, and it didn't feel great for that to be on the field and you couldn't actually do it until like an extra turn beyond what you thought you could. So for those kinds of reasons, those were easy takeouts as I played with the cube more and more. One of the other things that I had to consider was how does Pillar of the Parents as a land interact with the rest of the cube? I wasn't really careful with the removal spells that I had in here. And so the first time that this cube got drafted, my opponent played Vindicate on Pillar,
Oh no.
and I was out for the rest of the game. Right? Like Vindicate is a great spell. It's
Yes,
incredible and I love it. And it absolutely did not do the thing that I thought it was going to do.
because lands are permanents, it turns out.
Yes, lands are permanents, and I needed for a while about like, do I add a special rule about like pillar being like an emblem, or do I pretend that it's got hexproof and indestructible? Do I do something weird like that? And I realized that the answer was honestly just to remove all the spells that cared about it. So removing something like Genju of the Falls, removing something like Vindicate, removing something like some sort of Selesnya enchantment that looks like a zebra that attaches to a land as an aura. Removing things like that that did not go the way that I had anticipated. And then being mindful that you have to, when you're looking at removal spells specifically or targeting spells, it has to be able to avoid lands or avoid non-basic lands. It was one of those things where like I wouldn't have realized that until because I would not have thought to destroy somebody else's pillar until it was done to me, and I was like, "Oh, this has got to get out of here. I can't let that happen anymore."
Yeah, you don't want to undo the core conceit of the thing.
Mhm. Exactly. Like my first big mass exodus of cards was all cards that cared about targeting lands or tapping lands or exiling lands or anything like that.
So, Daniel, what's it like to try to balance an environment like this where players have access to so many colors so freely?
Here's the cool thing about this kind of cube. Because it is so restrictive, I'm only ever looking at maybe an additional 50 cards a year that get released. So once the cube is set, you really don't have to mess with it too much unless you're getting feedback from players saying, I don't know about this card. It seemed not very good, or this card seemed too good in every scenario that I played against it. I didn't have a way to beat it. So you really are listening for feedback from people who are playing it, but really it's just about like intuitively, how would it feel casting it? How would it feel getting cast against it? So I've tried to be really particular in the kinds of cards that I've added in. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but it's one of those things where I've really taken a lot of time to make sure that there is some balance, but also allows for people to be creative with what they draft.
No, for sure. I think that is a helpful answer. I think a lot of it, like, even as I look at the list now, thinking about how daunting it could be, at least starting from the beginning, to try to make this feel like it's balanced in some way. But it sounds like once you're in that place, it's minor adjustments rather than like having to do a whole lot of analysis through and through.
Yeah, I'm doing like maybe one overhaul a year, and I'm not really thinking too hard about what cuts to make or what not to make. I don't have a list of cards that are like, this is going to be on the chopping block if I don't see it perform so well next time. It's more about, hey, how did it feel playing this? Did it feel not impactful? Okay, then maybe I don't want it in this kind of format.
And perhaps that's a good segue. How do you evaluate cards for being cut from an environment?
I have a really difficult time with that. There are some cards that will be there forever, regardless what anybody says. There will be some things that like I have more access to over the years as things progress that I didn't have access to earlier. For example, I really resisted putting too many legendary creatures in because nowadays that's all that you get are gold legendary creatures.
Like dozens per set in some
Dozens
cases.
per set and multiple sets a year. And then you have commander decks where the gold card on the face or the supporting character is also a great bomb for you to play. But I didn't want this to become like necessarily a commander feeling kind of cube. So it was really difficult for me to like marry those two thoughts together. Ultimately, I have allowed more legendary creatures in as an archetype. And I think that thinking about it as an archetype and not as a signpost has made it more accessible for me. And also, like, there are more artifact gold spells that are printed now that are not just Esper. So I have the ability to put more things in than I used to, which means that some of the other stuff that was padding is being taken out. The other deck that I really, really love drafting in this kind of cube is the mill deck, because there's just so many weird, cool things that you're able to do with mill that you sort of come out of nowhere when you're just looking at a pile of gold cards.
Oh yeah. I think that's been one of my favorite things about this kind of environment is the number of cards that go together that you wouldn't be able to play in any other setting. I think like you had mentioned Siege Rhino and Blink at one point, but like that sort of thing, maybe that's the level 0, but like you talk about mill or graveyard interactions, how each color pair is going to engage with that differently, and you can cross the whole spectrum in a way that you can't normally.
Yeah. When you have drafted the cube, what have you been surprised by? What have you been delighted to do, and what did you not like?
I'm embarrassed to say that I have not
Oh,
no, I have not drafted this
oh
in paper.
no!
I've
Oh,
not had the opportunity to draft this in paper, but in
you wound me, sir.
oh boy, I'm limited on human hours, and my only regret is that I don't live any closer to every single person I get to hang out with. Um, I think what I found is that just making sure that you have the enablers for the wonky stuff you want to do is key. I found that in drafting or like, testing out this environment, that the temptation is like, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And you lean on the pillar in a particular way, but you have to make sure that it can do like, because the pillar can only fix one pip each time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's like you have to have a plan for getting across both. It's like if you want to do red, blue, and white, green, if those are separate, that's one thing. But like you have to also be able to produce the off color at the right time. I remember
Mhm.
talking to, I believe this was Bones that was talking about trying to do this where he focused in on one color and just treated the pillar as that one color every time. But what ended up happening was that like you could never double spell because that was your only source for that
Hmm.
color. And that's what ended up costing him in the finals of that bracket to, I believe, Anthony.
Oh, oh, yeah. Anthony does very well at this cube. Yeah, that is like early on, that was an unlock that people were like, "Oh, this is actually a possibility." Where it's just like you off pip one, relying on the pillar, and then you do like a monocolor deck for whatever color you actually wanted to be in. Most often it was red.
Sure.
But yeah, that ends up being like you put out threat, you put out threat, you put out threat. And then if they're able to do two spells at once, you're like, "Oh, I guess I'm behind now." So but I think it is also a really interesting design choice because if you are doing a monocolor deck, you're probably super aggressive. And you have a whole bunch of two drops and impactful three drops that you can pick that you're not then concerned about whatever like double spell the other person's trying to do.
I think there's a truth to that, but then also like there's a lot of beef at the 4 and 5 and 6 slots. Like
There
once you
is.
get past some of those
Hmm.
aggressive cards, if your opponent drops a haymaker that you don't have a solid answer for, that's that's tough.
I mean, you just described all of Magic, though. Like
Well, okay.
that is the breaks. So,
And I guess like you talked about gold cards typically being more powerful than their monocolored counterparts. And I
mhm.
know time hasn't been kind to all gold cards. But if you're in an environment like this where you're kind of playing above what the normal curve looks like, if your opponent gets off 2 where you're getting off 1, then it's going to look pretty rough.
Yes, yeah. That first initial like discovery that Bones did, that was before the thriving lands. Because you could also grab a thriving land that's in your color
Right.
and then make it whatever you need it to be. So like you're not really like that far off from getting to an accidental third color if you really need it.
I was going to note that this cube, I wasn't fully aware of all that you had done with it, and I was inspired to try to do a similar gold idea. But as I was tinkering with my own designs, I landed on a spot of, oh, I think I want to start with a tap land in play or something like,
Hmm.
a guild gate of where you get to pick your one two-color pair to begin with.
Oh.
And as I said that, Bones, my friend is like, well, have you looked at Daniel's cube? It's like, what do you mean? And it was like, oh no, this is just such a cooler fix in some ways. Like that you're able to then just say, hey, don't worry about any of that. You can go all sorts of directions. The world's your oyster. And also, I think worth noting that your start here really inspired a lot of what Bones did with Iganjo Drift, starting with the mech hanger.
So I've heard that, and I've heard that from other people, and I one am so charmed and delighted that like folks think that this is interesting enough to try to do themselves. Because I really like when I came out with this idea, I really didn't think that it was that groundbreaking. But yeah, the Ganjo cube is doing that. I've heard from other folks that they have taken that idea and added it to other ideas that they have. Somebody I think is doing one with the enchantment land that just came out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that seems dicey and exciting and scary and cool. Yeah, but it's like, how do you make the format that you want to accomplish? And it's really cool that others have been inspired by that. I did not think initially that this was all that different from what other cubes were already doing. So when somebody comes up and says something like that, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's so kind.
Well, it's nice to think that you've set up something that has resonated for people, whether it's
Hmm.
the gold, the all rainbow things, whether it is utilizing the land in that way as a tool to open up the game space. Like it's exciting to think that people have gravitated to that.
And truly, it's like building a commander deck, right? Like, what is it that you want to accomplish with this? If you are a designer, you are telling the story based on what you're constructing for your players, right? And so, how are you getting that idea across? And so I think that like giving a signpost like the pillar, it automatically like the art already has the 10 guilds in there. So you already know like sort of in your brain that that's kind of what you're working on. And then you get to depart that and you get to do whatever you like. And I just think that that's just an incredible opportunity for players to buck the trend of what they think they have to do in a cube draft and finally get to like express for themselves what they want to see fun happen on the board.
Yeah, and I love that that's kind of a fulfillment of your goal as a commander player, like to hear that journey from how do I take this element that I love and turn it into something I get to share with other people that they get to be part of the build process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really gratifying watching people draft it and like seeing things that I didn't see that they get to do. That always is like really exciting for me. Somebody who's getting all the token makers and then having like an Orzhov Aristocrats payoff. And then one game that I saw at the end of QCon, someone else had copied that. I think it was like Baron Bertram Greywater, whoever it is that makes vampires.
Oh yeah.
They'd made a frog copy of Baron, so they were also getting whatever the other person was doing, and then it would
Oh,
trigger back
that's
and forth.
amazing.
It was so much fun to watch. It was so very cool.
Yeah, because then you're an Orzov plus Simic, and it's like
Yes.
that's never gonna happen.
It was just a joy to watch. I loved it, and it's those kinds of moments you get to see that more in Commander. I think with the sheer number of cards that can like interact with each other,
Hmm.
but like there is a lot of that in here as well, and I just think that that's just such a cool design capability.
So, Daniel, are there design principles that you've used for reading Rainbow, or maybe your approach to building this cube that you've applied to other projects?
As I'm talking to you about this, I am looking at my wall of like commander decks. So I'm sure that one has fed into the other and like imitated back. I know that I have five, maybe six five-color commander decks, including a five-color Eldrazi colorless deck. So like it's all everywhere. I think that designing something that is personally meaningful to you is going to supersede anything that anybody else would otherwise want you to do with that design. For me, it's like I really like the idea of creating for somebody else. Like the act of creating for someone else to enjoy is really, really meaningful to me. I do that a lot with cooking. I am in a service industry kind of job where I find fulfillment supporting other team members to get their goals accomplished. And it's not designed specifically, but like, allowing others to express creatively is really meaningful to me. And so I think this is just one fraction of what I can give back to the community that has informed my life for the better part of the last like 23 years.
I imagine it would echo some of what you've just suggested. But do you have any advice that you would offer to other people who are designing projects of their own?
Make it fun. Make it fun for you. Make it fun for others to draft. Listen to feedback as it's presented and know what's important to hold on to and what you can let go of. The first round of Reading Rainbow that we ever played, all of the people in my cube group will say that they had a couple of hesitations about it because it was so different from what other people had ever done. And then they found pretty quickly that it was actually a lot of fun. It was really cool, and you didn't have to have an Umazawa Jite in there. You didn't have to have power in there. It can be great and fun and rewarding, and not have to try to compete at the highest level of what cube players typically expect out of the experience.
That's great.
In order to design, you have to design first for yourself, and then you have to design for your audience. I think if you err too much on the latter side, you lose yourself for it, and it does not become fun. It becomes exhausting. It becomes a trial. It becomes something that you have to force yourself to engage with because you're at the behest of others. But I also think that if you don't listen to them as they're playing it, as they're offering you feedback, then you're missing out on opportunities to make it more fun and engaging for others to play. I remember the first iteration of this, I had the 10 pip Progenitus
Yeah,
in it, which was like I thought it was the coolest card because it was, it's protection from everything and it can't be beat.
it's very gold.
It's the most gold thing out there. And people were like, no one's going to be able to play it. It's just a gotcha card that you're going to get as a 15th pick, and it's not gonna work. And then in one game, I did get it to work. I got a Knot Vine Mystic and I got a couple of untappers and I cast it and I won and it was great and I took it out of the cube, right? Because like,
Retire on top.
well, I knew that like it was physically possible, right? I knew that it could be accomplished, but the things that I had to do to make it happen were not going to happen very often in a typical game, and so I knew as a designer that that card needed to get cut. So, listening to like the team that was like the other people around the table, listening to that and taking it out and finding something more fun to put in, that was just as rewarding as the ability to put it out on top.
One of the things I found myself saying a lot, especially early on, discovering Cube, was that it's an opportunity to force other people to play what you enjoy. And then I found over time that it's like I want to pivot that to share rather than force. But like
Hmm.
that opportunity of it's something I like and I want other people to be part of it.
Yeah, you want it to be fun and engaging. You want it to be what they're used to, but you don't want it to be something that they're tired of expecting. This is a little bit about me. I read a lot of the Making Magic design blog that Mark Rosewater
Yeah.
puts out. And so a lot of the nuggets that I've gotten from him over the years about like restriction breeding creativity, listening for feedback, knowing what you can change to like make it fresh and exciting, but also it needs to stay the same so that people are familiar and feel comfort in the constancy. Those are the kinds of balances that I try to think about when I'm making cuts or adding new cards in. Am I completely derailing a an archetype in here that people enjoy just for the sake of putting new cards in, or am I able to put sneak a couple new cards in that actually really bolster this thing I'm trying to accomplish without taking away the other things that people like to play?
And I like that too, where you can borrow from how Mark would be talking about, designing a set from the ground up, and it's like, yeah, those principles should still apply to an environment like this.
Hmm. Yeah, the only difference is that they're making the cards and we are just like interpreting them.
Well, Daniel, as we trend toward wrapping up here, I get to ask one of my favorite questions.
Uh-oh.
If you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would it be and who would you have do the illustration?
That's a really good question. I think I would want a you know the sigil of the Guilds of Ravnica, the Guild Pact sigil?
Yeah.
They have iterations of it on cards, but they don't actually have it laid out like for everyone to see. Like you see it at an angle, or you see it at a corner, or you see it guarded by guards, or you see it on the floor with light over it. You don't actually get to see the entire sigil. I would love to have, I would say, a Pillar of the Parents with the sigil front and center as the art. And I could not tell you who I would want that art to be because I don't pay attention to the artist too much. Um, Rembrandt's dead, so I can't ask him.
Yeah, I don't think I've had anybody suggest Rembrandt before, but that's the Guild Pact seal front and center
Yep.
on
Hmm.
Pillar of the Parents.
Yeah, done by Rembrandt.
Oh, Daniel, this has been a delight, and I'm so grateful that you've been willing to spend your time and just share your passion for the game with me.
You are a delight also. I am really glad that Cube has invited me to get to know others who enjoy this as much as I do. And like being able to take inspiration from others that play similar cubes or vastly different ones. I just like I love that aspect of this entire subsection of the Magic community. I think that cube designers in general want to make a good experience for the people that they're designing for, and I think that that gets to come across more and more. So I really look forward to the next few years of cube design to see what gets adopted, who has the next really cool and off the wall idea that ends up becoming a staple in the community. This is just like so meaningful to me.
I'm glad we get to be part of it together.
Yeah.
If folks want to learn more about the Reading Rainbow, or perhaps have the mind-boggling experience of a pack one pick one that is entirely gold, where would be a good place for us to point them?
Reading Rainbow is on Cube Cobra. I think if you just type in Reading Rainbow, it'll show up. Designed by Fire Room Febby, that's me. It's got the pillars art at the front. It's hard to miss.
Excellent.
I am not up to date with socials. I don't really participate in the Discord or the Twitter or anything very much. So this would be the best way. But I do read when people leave comments on what they saw, what they liked on this. So that's always very helpful for me.
Well, thank you so much again for your time, for your spirit on the whole endeavor. This has been such a joy for me, and I hope it's not too long before we get to do it again.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad that you invited me to do this. Thank you so much.